Welcome to Moving Medicine Forward, a podcast presented by CTI Clinical Trial and Consulting Services. This podcast is centered on advancements in healthcare and elevating individual stories and their expertise. I'm your host, Jeremy Schran, and together with my co-host, Raina Graham,
Hello.
we will take you through a deep dive of CTI, clinical research, the patient journey, and much more. In this episode of Moving Medicine Forward, we are thrilled to welcome our guest from CTI, our CEO, Tim Schroeder, and our COO, Kevin Schwarz. They discuss the evolution of CTI from its founding vision to its significant impact on clinical research, innovation, and the growth over the past 25 years. Join us as we dive into discussions with Tim and Kevin, gaining a deeper understanding of CTI's remarkable journey and its pivotal role in shaping the future of clinical research.
Tim, I'm going to start with you. What was your original vision when founding CTI, and how has it adapted over the years?
I would say the original vision, was more formed out of an opportunity or a need. And when I say that, if you go back 25 plus years ago, the pharma services industry was pretty young. There were a handful of companies, some of which are still around today, and some have grown or gone out of business or changed. But having come from a transplant background, first at UC and at Cincinnati Children's, and then at Sangstat, where we worked with some of those early pharma service providers, we were struck by, there were really good companies and really good people, but nobody specialized in immunology or transplant. And so I think the original void or need that we saw was, why not develop a company that can fill the need of being focused in a set of therapeutic areas around immunology and transplant that don't or didn't exist at the time. I think what came to bear over time, is certainly the transplant thread still, is in the company. But it's interesting, what I think we got to be known for relatively quickly was we worked in small patient populations. Mm-hmm. And if you think of it, if you could find our original business plan, you would certainly not find the words rare disease in there anywhere. And I don't know, Kevin, you could speak to this, but I don't even remember us being intentional about rare disease. I think it was sort of serendipitous. We just got to be known that our teams could work in small patient populations. And we're good at finding the patients. They were good at keeping patients into studies. They were good at identifying the key opinion leaders and the sites that could do it. And I think that's the reputation just kind of grew from there. I think the transplant thread is interesting because in some ways our solid organ transplant, kidney, liver, heart, lung, pancreas, it led us into bone marrow transplantation. And the bone marrow transplant work led us into hematopoietic stem cell work, which then was kind of the basis for us jumping into cell and gene therapy a dozen years ago. So the transplant, kind of weaves two ways. It goes into the rare disease space and it goes into ultimately the CGT space that we work in today. But I don't know, Kev, jump in.
I think it's sort of evolved, Tim, over time. I mean, as you said, the first trials that I remember when I joined 21 years ago were transplant based. And then I remember you in my office saying, well, Kev, if we do this, why can't we do this sort of program? And that's is sort of evolved, and you had the roots, the core of very complex, difficult to execute programs that just evolved over time into, well, we can do this in this disease state and others. And so it's an evolution, really, more than anything. And more importantly, the reputation to excel and exceed in those difficult to recruit, difficult to execute programs. And so it's sort of just been an evolution over time, I think.
And certainly if you think about, just to build on that, our kidney transplant, it led us down the nephrology path. The liver transplant led us down the hepatology path. Obviously, the bone marrow transplant led us down the oncology path. So to your point, it wasn't there was a lack of intentionality, but some of it just was your teams are already doing complicated things. Here's one more set of complicated things to build on.
Yeah. You talked about how 25 years ago the industry wasn't as developed as it is today. How has CTI played an innovative and significant role in that growth in the industry, do you think?
I don't think we had to really be innovative. We just had to jump in. I mean, when I joined, everything was paper-based. 3-part NCR forms, paper TMF, trial master file. The history of a given program was a bunch of paper and secured locations. And
even when I started, I did a paper TMF. So
you know what I'm talking about. So, to evolve and to think about how we utilized Excel spreadsheets. Our internal sort of CTMS, clinical trial management system, was very much paper-based. And in the good old days, we'd have trials listed on our whiteboards in various conference rooms. We track enrollment in different places to how we have evolved in each of those areas now going forward. Think about the days of the paper-based, as I said, CRFs that now we morph into and embrace. Those big decisions, big discussions. What EDC system are we going to go to? Many years ago, electronic data capture, and making that decision and how that evolved to everything being electronic there, to an electronic trial master file system, to now a state-of-the-art CTMS system. And not only having those, but how are they integrated? How do they talk? How are they seamless? How is one point of entry taken through all of that technology? As if you think back to where we were and where we are today, and it's just, if you don't stay on that, if you don't stay current with that, if you don't stay ahead of the game on that, with updates, with new platforms, with what's going on in the industry, and all the things that ICH GCP is requiring currently in an evolving area, we just have to stay current with it. And I think in the past 20 some years that I've been here, it's been a very interesting ride as it relates to technology more than anything. That's what comes to mind for me.
Hearing that question raised, I think more often than not, when I hear somebody talk about CTI from the outside, what they usually talk about is our people. So in some ways, you've got to have state-of-the-art systems and processes to be in the game. But if you really want to differentiate, it's about the people. And if you look at it, and I remember this, I don't remember a lot of things, but I remember this clear as day. In the earliest days, people would say, and these were people usually somehow in the industry or tangential to it, they would say, how did you get those people? And they were referring to Kevin, to Lynn, to Maria, to Paul, to people like us. These were people who were incredibly accomplished at companies much, much larger than us. And so when it came to decisions, prioritization, investment, it was always, can you get the best people? Because if you get the best people, they'll figure the systems and processes out. It might take time, investment, things like that. But I feel the alternative, you can be the most cutting edge in something, but if you got mediocre people, it's probably not going to be successful very long term. So I always feel like it's a little bit of an oxymoron. Like, we work in the most innovative, cutting edge areas of research and medicine in the world, but the most basics are, do you have the best people and can you keep them?
So Kevin, you talked about that wild ride earlier. Give us some memorable milestones and achievements over the past 25 years.
Yeah. I would say there's a certain trial that sort of comes to mind. I believe it was a phase 2B kidney transplant program, and it was just a North American-based program, and the client came to us at a time when we had extension into other parts of the world, but more through partnerships and the like. And they came to us with the opportunity, I'll call it an opportunity, to go into other geographies where, we could do it, but, not necessarily like in North America, where their own people, our own processes, our own systems rely on third parties, and how to move into that arena and do it with the same quality that we had with our North American staff. And Tim, being the CEO that he is, and taking on those challenges and opportunities and embracing them. And that was a very complicated, I'll call it, process for me as a leader of the clinical trial operations group, and how we're going to perform and execute that. And I think that was tough, right? It was a tough situation just from an execution standpoint. How are we going to do this? Yeah. And those tough, difficult situations you're faced with and placed with, I think really take you as an organization further. And that it just is very memorable to me, because we embraced that and we made it happen. That trial ended up enrolling, being successful, led to phase 3 pivotal program with that same compound. And so it was, I'll call it a memorable sort of operational moment for me many years ago.
Tim, milestones?
You get asked a lot of times, some variation of that
Yeah,
same
right.
question. Sometimes it's new employees you're interviewing, sometimes it's people in the industry, maybe it's friends, whatever. I always put it into two categories. The one category of milestones being involved in working on therapies that ultimately fill unmet needs. If you look at it, the team globally has been part of more than 200 drug approvals. It doesn't matter really whether it was a cancer treatment or a transplant therapy or a COVID vaccine, whatever it happened to be, there's no doubt that as a milestone or as an accomplishment or as something you look back on, and I don't know if it's not fondly, but you just walk back and say, man, it was amazing the team was able to do what they did under the circumstances. I would put that into one category of saying things, those were really milestones, transformation, not just us, but helping people in the world, giving the physicians, nurses, pharmacists, another product in their armamentarium to try and treat whatever it is. I think the other side of it, though, again, comes back to the people side. I think it's pretty cool that we have hundreds, and to Kevin's comment earlier, of people that come in here, it's their first job out of college. Usually you get to see the first time they ever have to get dressed up to go to work, and I use that loosely because we don't get too dressed up anymore. Seriously, it's you literally get to see them get their first apartment. You get to see them a lot of times start, dating, the person that becomes their partner for life. You get to see their career progression with multiple promotions. And then ultimately family and kids, and you literally get to see that whole thing. And we have quite a few second generation researchers, which I think is also really cool, where mom or dad were at one of the cutting edge companies. Obviously for the people Cincinnati based in our organization, Kendall, was seminal to the industry and fed us, not just with some of our senior leaders like Kevin and Paul, but a lot of people, manager, director, et cetera. In other places around the world, other companies like that. But I think it's pretty interesting when the children, usually you see the opposite where somebody says, my mom or dad was an accountant. I'm never going to do that because accounting season is so difficult.
Yeah.
Or my mom or dad was a brain surgeon. I'm not doing that because they were never home. I think it's pretty cool to see how many second generation people we have where they've chosen to go into a field that their parents were in. And then, we also have the proverbial CTI families where, they start dating here, they end up getting married. Now I don't know that we have any of those with their kids working here yet, but they're probably not too far. But I'd put those out there, as being part of the conversation for milestones.
You talked about how second generation, and it shows how rewarding the work we do is. We see the impact on patients on a daily basis. What keeps you motivated and passionate after 25 years, 21 years in this industry, or even longer because you worked in this industry prior?
So I've been in now the clinical research area for close to 30 years.
Yeah.
And it all comes down to sort of two pillars, as Tim said, is the people we have that are so important, and we'll probably talk about that later. But it's really the patients that we're serving and the trials that we're conducting. At CTI, we deal with critically ill patient populations, and it is so rewarding for me personally and our staff to be involved in those programs where you're making a difference. This isn't a Me Too compound. This is a potential cure for a family who's very much struggling with their loved ones, and many times in a pediatric setting, which really is heart-wrenching to really see that, if you will, and being involved in those programs and the true need that's out there for a cure for families. And many of our employees also obviously have part of their family history and tree tied to some of these areas that we work in. And one Friday a month at our staff meeting, we actually have what we call a mission moment, which highlights maybe one of those situations, either in-house or in the community or with our sponsors that we work with, where we actually spend better part of that meeting, going through the history that this employee might have, if you will, why it means so much to them. And they have the floor And you look in, Tim and I were sitting next to each other in one of those, and we both sort of teared up and looked at each other and said, "Oh my gosh, that was impressive for that employee." Which
Yep.
we were looking at each other going, "Yeah, I didn't know that person really had that." But it means so much to work in this space, and especially what we do at CTI. I think, not that any research, all research is important, right? But really where we are, I think really means so much to everybody here coming in and day out, knowing they will make a difference today.
So how has this CTI culture evolved as we've grown to this large company?
I hear people talk, especially in the last probably 5 to 10 years, a lot about culture. And I don't know if that is a societal thing, that the culture is more of an interest or buzzword or whatever. But the funny thing is, I don't remember us even saying the word culture in the first 5 years. You might remember this different, Kev, but I think in some ways when you're in a startup situation, you're just trying to keep the lights on. You're trying to, will we survive till tomorrow? Can we do something good that somebody comes back as a customer or an employee who stays with us or whatever? So I don't think we were intentional at all about culture in those first years. Having said that, I do think though that, and far be it for me, there are people that write books on culture, there are people that give talks on culture, and I'm probably the least qualified to talk about culture. But I also find it kind of entertaining when a company hires a new executive or a new owner comes in and they go, "We're going to change the culture." Like that feels so artificial to me. Like the culture is who you are.
Right.
And I'm not saying your culture can't evolve either positively or negatively, but I feel like in those first 5 or 10 years, we probably built the foundations for the culture, although we weren't intentional about it. And it reminds me a little bit like you can see on social media or you can see on greeting cards that saying of like, I learned everything in life that was important in kindergarten or whatever that saying is.
Yeah.
Like in some ways, like I think people make culture more difficult than it needs to be or more complicated. Like culture is just treat people the way you want to be treated, or culture is make sure people know that they matter, or culture, it's simple things like that. So I like that we're more intentional about culture. I like that we are proud of the culture. I like that we recognize we can get better at culture, all those things. But I feel like it's just a genuine culture here. It's just people trying to do the right things for the right reason. And it's not that complicated. It's not that it's easy to do, but it's just not a very complicated concept in my view. I don't know.
I think it's your birthday today, so I'm going to flatter you a bit, but I think it's the tone at the top.
Yeah.
I really do. And we have a CEO, Tim, who he just doesn't, he walks the halls.
Right.
He takes the pulse of what's going on in this organization, not just to do it, but to mean it and to really relate to the employee base, to understand what their challenges are. If you think of memorable moments for me, I think of COVID. I remember this. It was just Tim and I in this building. Somehow he worked his way in, being a very large tenant in this building. But I said, "Tim, I can't work from home. I need to get me in." So it was just the two of us. I referred to the Friday meeting. We had a Friday meeting. It was just two of us in a conference room. Right when COVID started, everything was shutting down. My staff were, what's going to happen, Kev? What's going to happen, type thing. And unrehearsed, Tim gets in this conference room. We go through an agenda for our Friday meeting, updates on various areas within the company. And he takes the floor at the end of the meeting and he says, talked about COVID. And he said, I want you guys to take care of your family. There's a lot of worries you have right now. Don't make work one of those worries. You have a job, you will have a job. We'll get through this together. And I thought, wow. After the meeting, I said, "Tim, how do you
How can you be so naive about this?
But
Consider we couldn't spell COVID at the time.
That, I think, is the culture of the company. It's about the people we have, and about the belief and loyalty they have to us that we have to them. And I mean, it starts up top, and I think everybody feels that. It's not just said, it's felt. And that's important.
And it was felt when it was 5 employees, and it's felt when it's 1,200 employees globally, because you don't just walk the halls here in our River Center headquarters. You're traveling around the globe to the different offices, the different headquarters, and really showing employees that you care. We've certainly had a lot to celebrate over the past 25 years, a lot of milestones, a lot of achievements. What goals and aspirations do you have for the next 25? What's your vision for CTI continuing to grow?
I would say, I think human nature being what it is, I think there are certain personalities, as far as like looking back, looking forward, whatever. I don't find looking back particularly helpful most of the time. And that's not a strength or a weakness. It's just, that's who I am. I would say, like, I remember when we hit 20, or we were getting ready to celebrate our 20th anniversary. And I remember that was the time we're like, okay, what do you want to be 20 years from now? And so sometimes those milestones or those inflection points are good times to think about those things. And I remember there were a number of people. I remember Allie was a good example of somebody said, you need to define, like, what are the things that you're willing to negotiate on, or which ones are you not? And I would say one, what I think of is sustainability. We all know, you can look out the windows of the building here and you can see Procter & Gamble's headquarters and Kroger's headquarters and Fifth Third Bank and companies like that have been around 100 years, 150 years, 175 years. So, on one hand you go, oh, we've been around 20 years, that's pretty good. And then you're like, holy cow, these guys have been around, 5 times, 10 times how long we've been around. We're nothing. And so I remember the time of the issue of sustainable, what do we want the company to be 20 years from now? And that sort of forced the thought of, if you're going to try to be a better company, the best at what you do in the future, you need to put yourself in a position to be able to surround yourself with the best advice, the best guidance. So for instance, starting about 5-6 years ago, we started to strengthen our board. We brought in some really outstanding, strong people who had been in phenomenal organizations, many not in our industry, but just strong organizations. That, it was interesting when they came in, you said, look, we're going to give you something that usually is not what you talk to a board about, but what we're really looking for is you to challenge us to be the best version of ourselves and the most sustainable version. I don't know what research looks like in 20 or 25 years from now. My guess is it's going to involve artificial intelligence and wearables and implantables and, but I would still argue if you have the best people at that, you're probably going to be pretty good at that. I think at the same time that we were strengthening the board, we got really intentional on succession planning. So if you look, I was very blessed and continue to be with a really, really deep leadership team who was loyal and really, like I said earlier, came from some outstanding companies and set, really the pillars of what was important at CTI. Okay, the good news about that is we had, continuity for 10, 15, 20, even 25 years from some of our leaders, but that's not sustainable forever. So I think 5-6 years ago, we got really intentional about succession planning. And I'm really, and I've said this across the organization a number of times over the last 6-12 months, but I think we've never had a deeper leadership team. We've never had a broader leadership team. We've never had a younger leadership team, to be able to continue over the next 15, 20, 25 years of just being the best at what we do, and I think there's always going to be a need for a company, even though research will change how it's done. I think there will always be a need for a company to be excellent at making sure research is done in an efficient manner, in an ethical manner, in a manner that ultimately results in drugs that should be approved getting approved, and drugs that are not safe or ones that are not efficacious not reaching that goal line. So in some ways, I think that's when we think of the future, it's about that. Can you continue to attract and elevate and retain the best talent, and can you I would say the thing that our new group of leaders lacks is they don't believe in themselves as much as we believe in them. That's something that we need to do, in the coming years, is just get them to have a little bit more confidence, not arrogance, but just a little more confidence in their abilities. But I think to me, that's the vision, going forward.
What other advice would you give those next generation CTI leaders?
Be an active listener. Be an active listener with our clients, to our sponsors, to the community, to your staff. Really listen to what they're saying, listen to their needs, listen to what they're looking for, understand their goals, their objectives, and really Really listen. And don't be afraid of change, of transformation. Change is not easy. You've done something for 25 years. Well, guess what? We keep doing that for another 25. We're not going to be in existence. We're going to be out of business. And don't be afraid of that. Embrace that. It's a challenge. It can be an obstacle, but you can think of the rewards that come with that come with success to change. I think can really not only motivate, but take our organization further. So be an active listener and don't be afraid of change. Embrace change.
I think that's terrific points. The only thing I would add on to that is and this circles back around to what Kevin was mentioning before, but I think the issue of making a difference, is we are very blessed in our industry that we get to make a good living and make a difference. I would make sure, from a perspective of the difference, part of the difference is, can you make a difference in your organization, in your team, in your project, whatever, but the other part is, can you make a difference in the communities that you're in? And I think we're, if you think of us going back 10, 15, 20 years ago when we were substantially smaller, I would say we punched above our weight relative to being able to influence the communities. And a lot of that was done by our youngest employees. Mm-hmm. And I think they continue to do that. And the good news, if somebody said to me, well, 25 years from now, CTI is going to have 10,000 employees or 15,000 employees, that would make me feel good on several levels. One of which would be to say, well, how much more community work can you do with 10 times the number of associates they have now? I would argue at least 10 times more, maybe even more than that, maybe 50 times, kind of thing. So I think that's the other thing I just would add to Kevin's comment.
Let's talk a little bit more about that local and global community impact around the world. Give us some highlights of how CTI impacted the local community.
I think part of it just comes from being in healthcare, being in life sciences, being in research. I think there's a mindset of people that go into that. And that doesn't matter whether you're in HR or IT or finance or sales or operations. I think there is a philanthropy mindset of making the world a better place. I think from a company standpoint, it certainly brings us, I think, a lot of pride that a lot of our work in the communities is driven by the employees. It's not the company saying, we want to have X number of hours of community service, or we want this office to embrace this particular initiative or whatever. Almost always, it's the employees coming and saying, it would be great if we did this. To the comments Kevin made earlier about the mission moment, is we have a lot of people that have been touched personally, with challenges. And when we started the mission moment, the CTI Cares thing, probably close to a decade ago, the thought wasn't people would be so public about it. But I think we have very much found that the power behind that is people sharing their challenges, that their mother had breast cancer, that their neighbor is, lost their job and is going to, have financial challenges, whatever that happens to be. And so I think that aspect of it is, something that, one, like I said, I think it's easy for the company to get behind it when you have individuals doing it. And I think one of the things that maybe goes counterintuitive to the social narrative today is our youngest people are the ones with the biggest hearts and the probably the most vision, around those kind of topics. So.
Thank you both for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure going down memory lane about CTI in the last 25 years, and can't wait to see the next 25 years in the future.
So you'll do this podcast in 25 years as future leaders of the company, and you'll have the same opportunity to do this.
And you'll invite us back.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I'll be in the assisted living facility.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoy discovering how medicine is moving forward, or you are interested in how CTI could help you with clinical research, be sure to subscribe. Follow us on social media or visit our website at ctifacts.com.